What if I told you that a plane carrying 239 people simply disappeared, and after all these years, nobody can explain where it went? No wreckage on the surface. No distress call. No warning at all. Just a routine flight that vanished from radar screens over open water, as if it had been erased. You're about to hear the story of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, one of the greatest aviation mysteries in modern history. Militaries tracked it. Satellites pinged it. And still, investigators from a dozen countries couldn't agree on what happened. This isn't a story with a neat ending. It's a story that's still unfolding, even now. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why this case still haunts pilots, engineers, and grieving families alike. But first, you need to understand how ordinary this flight was supposed to be. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was scheduled to fly from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. It was a Boeing 777, one of the safest aircraft ever built, with a nearly spotless safety record. Nothing about this flight stood out. No mechanical red flags. No unusual weather. No security warnings. It was the kind of flight that happens thousands of times a day around the world, passengers half asleep before takeoff, flight attendants running through routine checks, pilots chatting with air traffic control like they had 1,000 times before. The aircraft departed just after midnight, climbing into clear night skies. For the first 40 minutes, everything about MH370 looked completely normal. But normal wouldn't last. Because somewhere over the Gulf of Thailand, something was about to happen that no one saw coming. And once it did, this flight would never be routine again. On board were 227 passengers and 12 crew members, representing more than a dozen nationalities. Most were Chinese nationals headed home or traveling for work. There were engineers, students, a group of celebrated Chinese calligraphers, and a young couple recently married. Families were waiting on the other end in Beijing, some already checking flight tracking apps to time their drive to the airport. The cockpit crew consisted of Captain Zari Ahmed Shah, a veteran pilot with over 18,000 flying hours, and First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, who was still completing his training on the 777. Both men had passed all standard background and medical checks. Nothing in their records suggested anything unusual. This was, by every visible measure, an experienced, well-qualified crew flying a well-maintained aircraft. Which makes what happened next even harder to explain. Because the very last words anyone would hear from the cockpit were about to be spoken. At 1:19 a.m. Malaysian Air Traffic Control instructed MH370 to contact Vietnamese Air Traffic Control as the plane approached Vietnamese airspace. The response from the cockpit was calm, almost casual, "Good night, Malaysian 370. That was it. No hesitation. No distress in the voice. No hint that anything was wrong. Investigators would later analyze that recording again and again, searching for any trace of stress or duress in the pilot's tone. They found none. Just a routine sign-off, the kind spoken thousands of times by pilots handing off between air traffic zones. 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m. the plane's transponder, the device that broadcasts its identity and altitude to radar systems, went silent. No warning. No emergency signal. The aircraft simply stopped communicating with the world. And that's when investigators say the real mystery begins. Within minutes, MH370 vanished from civilian radar entirely. To ground controllers, it was as if the plane had ceased to exist. But military radar told a different story. Malaysian military radar continued tracking an unidentified aircraft that appeared to turn sharply westward, away from its planned route to Beijing, crossing back over the Malay Peninsula and heading out over the Andaman Sea. This wasn't public knowledge for days. For hours, air traffic controllers assumed the plane was simply delayed in handoff between countries, a bureaucratic mix-up rather than a full-blown crisis. By the time anyone realized MH370 was truly missing, the plane had already been flying, unidentified and unexplained, for hours. Investigators would later confirm the aircraft continued flying for nearly 7 hours after losing contact. 7 hours. Where was it going? And more importantly, who was flying it? When Malaysia officially declared the plane missing, search operations began almost immediately, but focused entirely in the wrong place. For days, ships and aircraft scoured the Gulf of Thailand and South China Sea, the area where MH370 had last appeared on civilian radar. It became one of the largest search operations in aviation history, eventually involving more than 24 countries. But nothing was found. No debris. No oil slick. No wreckage. As the days passed, questions started multiplying faster than answers. Then came a detail that changed the entire search. Satellite data from a company called Inmarsat showed the plane had kept sending faint automated signals, handshakes, 4 hours after vanishing from radar, far from where anyone was looking. The search zone shifted dramatically, from the South China Sea to the remote southern Indian Ocean, thousands of miles away. And that single discovery would reshape everything investigators thought they knew. The Inmarsat data was unlike anything investigators had used before. These satellite handshakes, essentially automatic pings between the aircraft and a satellite, weren't designed to track location precisely, but engineers used complex mathematical modeling to calculate a rough arc, curve stretching from Central Asia to the southern Indian Ocean, along which the plane must have been at the final ping. Based on speed, fuel range, and flight dynamics, investigators narrowed their focus to the southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote stretches of water on Earth. It was groundbreaking work, but it was also, by nature, an estimate. Investigators openly admitted the search area, thousands of square miles of open ocean, was still enormous. Search teams deployed ships, sonar equipment, and underwater drones. Weeks turned into months. And still, the ocean gave up nothing. Until, unexpectedly, something started washing ashore thousands of miles away. In July 2015, more than a year after the disappearance, a barnacle-covered piece of aircraft debris washed up on Réunion Island, near Madagascar, over 3,700 miles from the search zone. It was identified as a flaperon, a wing component, from a Boeing 777. French investigators confirmed it belonged to MH370. Over the following months, more fragments appeared on beaches across the western Indian Ocean, in Mozambique, South Africa, and Mauritius. Each piece was barnacle-encrusted, weathered, consistent with drifting across the ocean for over a year. For grieving families, this was both confirmation and torment, proof the plane had crashed into the ocean, but still no answers about why, or exactly where. Oceanographers used drift pattern modeling on the debris to work backward, refining the estimated crash zone. It seemed like real progress. But the deep-sea search that followed would raise a chilling new question. Between 2014 and 2017, search teams scoured over 46,000 square miles of ocean floor, one of the most technically difficult underwater searches ever attempted. They mapped previously uncharted seabed, discovered shipwrecks completely unrelated to MH370, and used advanced sonar to scan depths of up to 20,000 feet. And still, they found nothing resembling the missing aircraft. In January 2017, the official search was suspended. Then in 2018, a private company, Ocean Infinity, resumed the hunt using autonomous underwater drones, covering new territory north of the original zone. They too came up empty. To this day, the main wreckage and the plane's black box, the flight data and cockpit voice recorders that could explain everything, have never been recovered. Without that black box, investigators have been forced to rely on fragments, satellite math, and drift models instead of hard evidence. And that gap in the evidence opened the door to something investigators hadn't expected. With no wreckage and no black box, theories filled the silence, and it's important to be clear, these are theories, not confirmed facts. One widely discussed theory, mechanical failure or fire, was largely ruled out by investigators because it wouldn't explain the plane's sharp, deliberate turn and hours of continued flight. Another theory involves a hijacking, though no credible evidence, no ransom demand, no claimed responsibility, ever surfaced. The theory that has drawn the most scrutiny, and the most controversy, centers on the cockpit itself, the possibility of deliberate pilot action. Investigators noted the captain had a flight simulator at home, and Malaysian authorities acknowledged simulator data showed a route resembling a path into the southern Indian Ocean, though officials never called this conclusive proof of intent. Family members and independent investigators have pushed back hard on this theory. No confirmed motive was ever established. But even among experts, consensus never came. And that disagreement itself became part of the story. There are smaller, lesser-known details that rarely make headlines but deepen the mystery further. For instance, the aircraft's satellite communication system was switched off, then mysteriously switched back on roughly an hour into the flight, something investigators found difficult to explain through mechanical failure alone. There's also the fact that the plane's altitude appeared, according to some military radar readings, to fluctuate sharply at points, though this data was never fully verified. Malaysia's own internal investigation faced criticism for delays, inconsistent statements, and information that changed in the early days of the crisis, fueling public distrust. Some family members have accused officials of withholding information entirely. Independent investigators, journalists, and aviation experts have spent years combing through the same limited dataset, often reaching different conclusions from identical evidence. This wasn't just a search for a plane. It became a search for the truth about what people were, and weren't, being told. And that search hasn't ended. In the years since, new debris has occasionally surfaced, quietly reigniting public interest. In 2016, a piece confirmed to be from MH370 washed up in Tanzania. Independent debris hunter Blaine Gibson personally recovered and helped identify multiple fragments across the region. Then, in 2023 and 2024, renewed calls emerged, from scientists, oceanographers, and grieving families, for the search to resume, citing improved drift modeling and new underwater survey technology. Ocean Infinity, the private search company, announced in 2023 that it intended to renew its hunt in the southern Indian Ocean using updated data. As of the most recent reporting, the Malaysian government has expressed openness to a no-find, no-fee search agreement. A full decade after the disappearance, this case remains technically open, not closed, not solved, just unresolved. For families, that means an anniversary every year without answers. And for investigators, it means the file on MH370 has never truly been shut. Even today, aviation experts remain divided. Some believe the debris and satellite data overwhelmingly support a southern Indian Ocean crash site that search teams simply haven't reached yet, perhaps because the calculated search zone was slightly off. Others argue investigators may have been searching the wrong depth, or missed wreckage buried under sediment. A smaller group continues to question the reliability of the Inmarsat satellite data altogether, though the majority of independent aviation analysts consider that data scientifically sound. What almost everyone agrees on is this: without the black box, true certainty may never be possible. Flight data recorders exist for exactly this reason, to remove speculation and replace it with fact. Here, that recorder sits somewhere at the bottom of one of the most remote oceans on Earth, if it survived the impact at all. And that single missing piece of hardware is the reason this mystery has outlived an entire decade. MH370 changed the aviation industry in ways most passengers never realize. In its aftermath, international aviation bodies introduced new tracking requirements, pushing airlines towards systems that report aircraft position more frequently and reliably, so a modern jetliner can no longer simply vanish from monitoring the way MH370 did. It's a case now studied in aviation safety courses worldwide, a stark reminder of how much of global air travel still depends on assumptions, that transponders stay on, that pilots act predictably, that satellite coverage is enough. For the families of the 239 people on board, though, policy changes offer little comfort. Many are still fighting for renewed search efforts, for transparency, for simple closure. Some have spent their retirement savings hiring independent investigators. Others have given up hope of ever finding the plane, hoping instead just to understand why. The case remains, technically, open. And what happens next depends on a search that may or may not ever resume. Somewhere in the vast, dark waters of the southern Indian Ocean, there's a good chance the wreckage of MH370 is still sitting on the ocean floor, silent, undiscovered, holding answers that 239 families have waited over a decade to hear. Think about that for a moment. A modern aircraft, tracked by satellites, monitored by militaries, studied by the best investigators in the world, and still, we don't know exactly what happened in that cockpit, or why. Every theory has gaps. Every piece of evidence raises new questions. That's what makes this different from other air disasters. It's not the absence of information, it's the presence of just enough information to make the silence unbearable. Maybe technology will finally locate the wreckage. Maybe the black box will surface one day and end the speculation for good. Or maybe MH370 will remain exactly what it's been since March 8, 2014, one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the history of flight. What do you think really happened up there?